This is a chapter-by-chapter summary of the book 1984 by George Orwell. Chapter 1. Winston Smith returns to his dilapidated apartment building, Victory Mansions, and navigates his way past the telescreen that scrutinizes his every move. The telescreen continuously broadcasts propaganda from the party, urging unquestioning loyalty to Big Brother and warning of the severe consequences of dissent. Despite the oppressive surveillance, Winston finds a small alcove in his apartment where he can evade the telescreen's watchful eye. This hidden spot represents a tiny, fragile bastion of privacy in Winston's monitored life. He reflects on the nature of his oppressive world and the party's relentless control over all aspects of life, including thoughts, history, and truth. The grim setting and mood introduce the reader to the repressive environment that defines the novel. Chapter 2. Winston secretly purchases a diary and begins to write in it, an act punishable by death if discovered. He writes, "Down with Big Brother" multiple times, a rebellious act that signifies his internal dissent against the party's totalitarian control. As he writes, he contemplates the futility and danger of his act, reflecting on the omnipresence of the thought police who could arrest him for this thought crime at any moment. The act of writing is not just rebellion, but also an assertion of individuality and a testament to Winston's lingering human spirit beneath his outward conformity. Chapter 3. Winston dreams of his mother and sister, recalling their disappearance during the political purges of his childhood. These memories are painful and indicative of the personal losses that haunt him. He also dreams of an idyllic landscape, which represents a world unmarred by the party's control. Upon waking, he remembers a public execution he witnessed, which brings into sharp relief the brutality of the regime under which he lives. These dreams and memories emphasize the deep psychological impact of the party's authoritarian rule on Winston and his yearning for a more humane and free existence. Chapter 4. Winston works at the Ministry of Truth, where his job is to rewrite historical records to align with the party's ever-changing official narrative. This day, he revises past newspaper articles to make the party appear infallible and prophetic. The meticulous alteration of documents illustrates the party's control over knowledge and truth, revealing how the regime manipulates the past to secure its power in the present and future. Winston's role in this process makes him both a perpetrator and a victim of the party's lies. Chapter 5. At the ministry's canteen, Winston has a conversation with Syme, a colleague working on the 11th edition of the Newspeak dictionary. Syme enthusiastically explains how Newspeak is designed to reduce the capacity for rebellious thoughts by eliminating words related to such ideas. The conversation highlights the party's strategy to limit thought and control language as a means of maintaining power. The lunch scene exposes the everyday normalization of totalitarian control and the enthusiastic participation of some citizens like Syme who unwittingly contribute to their own oppression. Chapter 6. Winston recalls a recent experience where he was forced to attend a 2-minute hate session, a daily public ritual where citizens express their hatred for enemies of the state, particularly Emmanuel Goldstein, a supposed traitor. During the session, Winston feels a conflicted mix of emotions and notices Julia, a young woman working in the fiction department. His initial suspicion and hatred toward her contrast with his later attraction, setting the stage for their complex future interaction. The chapter illustrates the party's use of organized hatred to unify the populace and divert dissatisfaction away from itself. Chapter 7. Winston takes a solitary walk through a poorer part of London inhabited by proles, the working class, who are largely free from party surveillance. He enters a pub and attempts to ask an old man about life before the party's rise to power, but the man's memory is unreliable. Winston's quest for truth about the past is frustrated by the party's effective erasure of historical memory. This exploration underscores the theme of historical manipulation and the difficulty of establishing a true understanding of history under a regime that continually alters it. Chapter 8. Continuing his walk, Winston visits Mr. Charrington's shop, where he buys a paperweight, a symbol of the past. Mr. Charrington shows him a room upstairs that is devoid of a telescreen, sparking Winston's interest as a potential safe haven. The chapter ends with Winston feeling a sense of foreboding, yet drawn to the idea of renting the room as a private escape. This impulse represents his growing need for a space where he can explore his thoughts and feelings away from the oppressive oversight of the party. Part 2. Chapter 1. Winston and Julia unexpectedly commence a romantic affair after Julia slips Winston a note saying, "I love you." Despite the party's oppressive control over intimate relationships, they find secluded spots outside the city to express their affection and share personal stories. Their relationship represents not just a personal connection, but an act of rebellion against the totalitarian regime. During their secretive meetings, they discuss their lives and the extent of the party's invasion into their personal freedoms. This burgeoning relationship offers them brief respite from the oppressive reality of their existence under Big Brother's constant surveillance. Chapter 2. Winston and Julia's relationship deepens as they secure a private meeting place, a rented room in Mr. Charrington's shop in the Prole district. This setting, seemingly devoid of telescreens, allows them not just for physical intimacy, but also for expressions of rebellion, such as reading forbidden books and discussing their hatred for the party. Their meetings in this room become a sacred space of privacy and resistance, albeit fraught with the danger of discovery. Chapter 3. During their meetings in the rented room, Winston and Julia discuss their views on the party's control and the possibility of a broader rebellion. Julia, pragmatic and experienced in her defiance against the party, expresses skepticism about an organized uprising, but indulges Winston's philosophical tirades against their oppressors. She focuses on small, personal acts of rebellion, preferring them to grandiose schemes, which she believes are unrealistic. Chapter 4. Winston and Julia visit O'Brien at his home, where they declare their opposition to the party. O'Brien welcomes their dissent and covertly confirms his role in the Brotherhood, an underground resistance group. He promises to provide Winston with a book that outlines the ideology and strategy of the resistance. This meeting marks a significant shift from personal rebellion to political subversion for Winston and Julia, who are now linked to a larger movement against the party. Chapter 5. Winston receives the book from O'Brien, written by Emmanuel Goldstein, the alleged leader of the Brotherhood. The book provides a critical analysis of the party's techniques of control and manipulation. As Winston reads it to Julia in their secret room, they discuss its contents, particularly the concepts of perpetual war and historical revisionism. The book enlightens them on the broader strategies of their society's manipulation and control. Chapter 6. Winston and Julia continue their clandestine meetings, but their sense of security is a facade. One day, during one of their meetings, the thought police burst into their room. It turns out that Mr. Charrington, the seemingly benign shop owner, is a member of the thought police. The room was bugged, and their rebellion was closely monitored from the beginning. This betrayal leads to their arrest, marking the end of their brief period of relative freedom. Chapter 7. Winston is imprisoned in the Ministry of Love, where he encounters other prisoners, diverse in their societal roles but similar in their fates of facing the party's brutal retribution. Among them is Ampleforth, a poet arrested for retaining the word God in a translation because he could not find another rhyme. This chapter exposes the arbitrary and severe nature of the party's control over even the most minor acts of nonconformity. Chapter 8. In the Ministry of Love, Winston is reunited with O'Brien, who reveals himself as a loyal servant of the party. O'Brien takes over Winston's interrogation and torture, explaining to him the party's philosophy and the futility of resistance. Through painful and disorienting sessions, O'Brien begins the process of re-educating Winston, breaking down his resistance and rebuilding him into a subservient member of society. Chapter 9. Winston, now broken and compliant, is subjected to further psychological manipulation, aimed at erasing his rebellious thoughts and instilling absolute loyalty to Big Brother. O'Brien orchestrates a series of tortures in Room 101, where Winston is confronted with his worst fear, rats. This final ordeal breaks Winston completely, making him betray Julia by begging to let the punishment be transferred to her instead. Chapter 10. Following his release from the Ministry of Love, Winston is a changed man, devoid of personal rebellion and fully indoctrinated into party ideology. He mechanically readapts to life in society, spending his time at the Chestnut Tree Cafe, and has lost all emotional connection to Julia. His transformation is complete when he experiences a profound sense of victory and love for Big Brother, symbolizing the party's total control over the individual. Part 3. Chapter 1. Winston is detained in the Ministry of Love, the most feared place for those who rebel against the party. Here, Winston encounters O'Brien, who, to his dismay, is actually a loyal member of the party and one of Winston's interrogators. The Ministry of Love specializes in the art of breaking down rebels through systematic torture and psychological manipulation. O'Brien's role is to cure Winston of his disloyal thoughts towards Big Brother and to reintegrate him into society as a faithful citizen. O'Brien uses a mix of kindness and cruelty to confuse and control Winston, illustrating the complex psychological methods employed by the party to enforce loyalty. O'Brien systematically dismantles Winston's belief in an objective reality outside the party's control, insisting that reality exists only in the mind, which the party controls. Through relentless interrogation and manipulation, O'Brien seeks to break Winston's spirit entirely. Chapter 2. Winston's re-education reaches deeper levels of brutality as O'Brien employs various methods of torture to alter Winston's perceptions of reality. Winston is forced to endure physical pain from the electric shock machine and psychological torture designed to make him accept whatever the party deems true, even if it means believing that 2 plus 2 makes 5. Throughout this process, O'Brien alternates between torturer and confidant, deepening Winston's confusion and dependency. The party's objective is clear: to control not only the societal narrative, but the thoughts and inner lives of its citizens. O'Brien repeatedly emphasizes that the party does not merely seek obedience, but genuine conversion of belief. Winston struggles internally, but gradually begins to break, his resistance worn down by the incessant torture and his isolation from any form of reality not mediated by the party. Chapter 3. The climax of Winston's torture occurs in room 101, where he is confronted with his greatest fear: rats. O'Brien uses a cage with hungry rats that can be let loose to attack Winston's face as the ultimate tool of terror. It is here that Winston's resolve finally shatters, and he betrays his love for Julia by begging O'Brien to subject her to this horror instead of him. This act of ultimate betrayal signifies Winston's total breakdown and submission to the party. He has been forced into complete loyalty to Big Brother, having lost all personal integrity and the capacity for individual love and resistance. The use of personal fear highlights the party's practice of exploiting individual vulnerabilities to ensure total control over individuals. Chapter 4. After his release, Winston is a changed man, broken by his experiences in the Ministry of Love. He spends his days at the Chestnut Tree Cafe, drinking gin and mechanically participating in the routine activities of the society. His thoughts occasionally wander to his time in the ministry and his meetings with Julia, but these memories bring no pain or regret. Eventually, Winston meets Julia again. They awkwardly confess that they betrayed each other and that their feelings for each other have been extinguished. The meeting underscores the effectiveness of the party's tactics in destroying personal bonds and loyalties, leaving behind only the love for Big Brother. Chapter 5. In the final chapter, Winston has fully succumbed to the ideology of the party. Sitting alone in the Chestnut Tree Cafe, he finds joy in a reported victory of Oceania against its enemies. Tears stream down his face as he experiences a profound love for Big Brother. The transformation is complete. Winston's thoughts and feelings are entirely aligned with the party's dictates. The novel ends with the chilling realization of the party's absolute power and control over the individual, culminating in Winston's psychological and emotional allegiance to the regime he once silently opposed.